Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Writing Wednesday. My name is Allie. I work at Union West.
My name is Kris, and I work at Monroe.
And I'm Tino, and I also work at Monroe.
And today we are celebrating National Poetry Month, the month of
Yay!
April. We are very excited. And today we're going to be talking a bit about found poetry. And we're doing that because it's been a long stretch for us. There's been a lot going on, and I know if you're anything like me, maybe you've been feeling a little bit creatively not at your most productive. So, we're going to be talking a bit about how you can use some text that already exists out there to kind of jumpstart your creativity and maybe get you back in the game a little
Yes, snap snaps.
bit. All right. So, found poetry in a nutshell. Found poetry is created when you use pre existing text to form a new poem. So, that can be from a variety of sources. You can use multiple sources. It's kind of up to you how you do it. It's kind of the world is your oyster, except you try to stay in the bounds of the order that it was originally created in. So, anybody else have a good idea of how you think about found poetry?
I think of it in a couple different ways. I think my favorite example of found poetry is kind of when they integrate pictures into pieces that have been written. And they kind of sparse up the pieces and add in the pictures and give it a whole different approach to the poem. I mean, maybe just changes the meaning a little bit. I'm a big fan of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like the sorts of like found poetry where you're given a particular page, and then you just kind of work with what you got there, either blacking out or whatever you end up doing. Um, and I like how constrained it is, just
Mhm.
because like if you're sitting down to a blank page, there's a million poems that you can write, but there's a finite number of poems that are contained within this one sheet of paper. Um, and I like that it's sort of it takes the it takes a bit of the creative onus off of me, right? Like there's no need for me to like be brilliant because like I'm not making it up from scratch. I'm taking what I have and I'm beautifying it, right? Like it's only going to get better. Um, and that's what I appreciate about it, because there's no sense of responsibility of having to come up with something that's really great. You're making the best of the the pile of words that you have.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I love that it can be this sort of, like you were saying, there's a limited pool of words you can choose from, but there are limitless possibilities with what you can do with them. And so it's kind of like you were saying, Tina, you don't, the genesis is not necessarily with you. It already exists. You're not creating it from scratch. You kind of do have a recipe in a sense. These are the items you can use to make this new thing. But you can really, I found, surprise yourself with what you come up with and where you go with it. And you can create something totally new that also has this other layer to it in that it already existed.
Yeah, it's kind of like the poem's already there. You're just kind of like brushing leaves off of it and
Mhm,
like getting it to actually show.
mhm.
I like that. I like it. Ah, okay, so here we are. Found
Right.
poetry.
So what we were kind of like we were saying, found poetry in its purest form, you generally try to stick to what is already there. You try not to add too many words or subtract too many words. Well, subtracting you can do, but adding in different words, you try to keep it largely again in the order in which it appears and not shaking up that order too much, if you're being really strict in keeping with the form. Most of the creativity comes in with where you break the lines, where you create line breaks, how you structure it, and different forms. So if you're going to make it into a picture like Kris was talking about, or if you're going to add illustrations to your piece in the page, then that's up to you. And that's kind of where your agency as a poet, as a writer, comes in, is how you're going to manipulate the text and manipulate the message to make it your own and incorporate maybe a few different texts as well.
Very nice. I don't know. I really love the idea of referring to it as lost and found poetry, because doesn't it seem like poetry is consistently lost? Like it's never really in the forefront of people's minds. It's kind of, I was thinking about how when I was a kid, poetry to me was just hokey and corny and puns on top of puns. And the more, like, as I transitioned into like a moody emo kid or, uh, a pseudo goth, then it became, oh man, poetry is just the language of my feelings right now. And I think that I'm glad I also transitioned out of that into like a general appreciation for poetry, because it is so very much like finding. Once you like rediscover poetry, it's like rediscovering a little part of yourself, a little more, a different way to tap into your feelings, I guess. Like, to be fair though, it was fun being, that pseudo goth. Oh God, poetry really, I really get Emily Dickinson. I get her.
I also feel like the actual experience of writing poetry is a bit of a lost and found kind of experience, right? Like the words are kind of like errant dogs that you got to go looking for every once in a while because they run away. Like just finding the right words for it is definitely a sense of looking for something that's lost, because the strange thing happens where we're all perfectly capable English speakers and writers, but when you sit down to write a poem, all of a sudden all that comes out is gibberish, and you have like all of the words are just gone, and you're just kind of like searching through all of the things that you had. They're just somewhere misplaced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think it's so interesting that you can express certain things in poetry that just could not be expressed in any other way. It just wouldn't make sense. We can spend whole novels trying to capture a feeling and just never get there. But somehow in these two lines, this one image that we're making, we land on something that is so elusive. So I think that it's there's just something about it. There's just something about poetry that just is not like anything else.
No, that's true. I mean, my favorite thing when I'm writing poetry is the fact that everyone looks at it as one of the most rule based kind of forms. And that's true in some aspects. But the only rules you really have are based on, syllables and syntax and stuff. There aren't any rules about the words that go onto the page. So there's something really fun about writing something like a very structured ode that's made up of, um, you know, sorting through your vinyl collection.
Mhm,
Like there's something cheeky about poetry in that way.
mhm. Absolutely. So we've got a few examples here. An unemployed machinist, and that's by John Giorno from his book Falling Buddha. And then we've got another excerpt from Charles Reznikoff's testimony, which he created from law reports. And then we've got this last picture here that's a little bit more, it's not blackout poetry, but it's a little bit different. It incorporates the text. There's a greater dialogue with the text there in our last example. Um, So yeah, again, I think it's so interesting to look and see, especially about the one in the middle, the Charles Resnikoff one, to think of someone going through a series of law reports and picking out something that to me does not sound like a law report, but it's to see how much work and how different the themes can be and how they can be incorporated into something new. I think is so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's gorgeous. One of the texts that we're going to recommend at the end is found poetry that instead of being pulled from law reports was pulled from Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So that should be fun for
Hmm.
people. Here we go. It's so pretty.
Yeah, blackout poetry. This is a little bit different. Like we were saying, is there's more dialogue with the original text here because you can see it. You can kind of, if you know it, you might be able to pick out where it came from. And so you know a bit of the backstory, you know a bit of what it used to be. The tree illustration actually comes from Pride and Prejudice. So if you know the story of Pride and Prejudice, you know how it goes. You read this poem, you're also thinking about that. So you're thinking about the intersections between those two works. And we've got an intersection between two poets, two works, and then we've got this visual art element. So blackout poetry is really fascinating in a few different ways. It incorporates different art forms, it incorporates different texts, and there's a lot of conversation going on in blackout poetry. It's probably one of my favorite forms.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, like we have eraser poetry, which is instead of just blacking out the words or drawing over them, you're actually whiting out everything else to
Mhm.
where those words are literally all you're seeing standing out on the page.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out just in general as well that like blackout poetry need not be quite this level of artistic, right? Like I think that there's something very beautiful about the starkness of just like expo marker or not expo marker, Sharpie marker on just a regular page. I mean, absolutely, like this is beautiful too, and like I don't want to take anything away from the artist, but just as a general exercise in poetry, whether you're novice or advanced, I think that just going through the exercise of just doing the regular blacking out, there's a real contrasting beauty in that, and I think it's also a really good. One of the things that I like about blackout poetry is that it's a great solution to books that you own, feel guilty about throwing out, but are really in no condition to like keep on the shelf and read.
That's right.
Right? Like
Upcycle.
it could be one of those you know, old romance novels that's just tattered and beat, or it could be one of those, you know, nice old hardcover books about, you know, some obscure county somewhere that you don't know, but like you just feel guilty about throwing a book out. Like this gives it a new life and a new purpose.
Yeah, and I think something to keep in mind is that, like you were saying, Tino, it doesn't have to be Pride and Prejudice. If you have, like we were talking about, a law report or some other, I don't even know, and some like
Magazine article, news
some,
clipping.
yeah,
Dictionaries are fun for this too.
the soybean report, anything you've got, you can use,
Yes,
and you
soybean
can
report. I love it. I love it.
and you can
Please.
make it something interesting. It doesn't have to be inherently artistic. And again, like Tina was saying, I could not draw the tree, I could not draw the sunrise here. That is beyond my capabilities. But even if you just black out some pages, you're still creating visual art. There's still something. Looking at the picture here in the middle, that poem, that is not like reading a normal poem. there's something different there. The black space creates another element, and you read it differently. Your eyes view it differently. So don't let that deter you if you don't consider yourself visually artistic.
Yeah, and even if the, you don't go into an exercise like this trying to write the greatest poem out of Blackout ever. It's actually more like a cathartic exercise more than anything else. You'll end up being very surprised at what you're blacking out and what is there at the end.
Mhm.
It's always a really fun exercise that's always very like, oh wow, I didn't know I could accidentally write something so beautiful.
I think it's nice to, like, as a kid exercise too, to make you pay attention to the the importance of different types of words when you're writing from a blank page. I think you're thinking about the major words, like the verbs and the nouns, and making sure that you pick just the right ones to express your feelings, right? But when you're doing the blackout poetry, I think that you really start paying attention to, like, all of the articles and that sort of thing, because you're like, ah, crap, this sentence doesn't make sense if I don't have like a the in the right order before this noun that I want to use, right? So like it really makes you pay attention to the little pieces of the language that before you just kind of took for granted. Um, but it shows you how important the little pieces, the hobbits of the poem, so to speak, are.
Yeah.
Aww.
And I think it pushes you. Like, what if you don't have a the? What now? What do? You have to do something.
Yeah.
So it forces you to be creative and to consider the power of other words and to maybe phrase something differently than you would normally do.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love concrete poetry.
Yes. We got
It's
concrete poetry, and maybe Kris, if you want to take this
Yeah, I'm
for
happy to
poetry.
talk about concrete poetry. So, uh, concrete poetry is called concrete poetry because it looks exactly like what your poem is about. This is it's a little trickier sometimes. As you can see, there are different levels of um, I don't know, genius in front of me. I've seen everything from a perfectly square block about that was a poem about a square to now I see airplanes and this very I'm sorry, this is just so intriguing to me because the way that it's drawn with the words forces you to read it a certain way and it's phenomenal. You know, the way they did the moon here, you can see that they went as far as to break up the individual words to make it more fluid and force you to read it out like that. And also, the fun thing about concrete poetry is you kind of get to throw out uh, the understanding of how you read a poem. Usually, when you're reading a poem out loud, you have to make sure you stop at the commas, stop at the line breaks. With concrete poetry, you don't even have to worry about any form of punctuation. Just keep going. It's fine. All the rules have been thrown out in favor of your beautiful panda. Panda people. Oh my god, what is better than a panda? A poem about a panda that looks like a panda. I'm always this is something that is both outside of my ability to write because my brain is like, "What?" But also it's my favorite thing to read because people really like look at the context of what they're writing and go as far as to like graph it out before they start filling in the wording. I'm such a big fan of this.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so interesting because I've never done this before. I've never tried concrete poetry. So I think, I mean, it's interesting to think about where you would start. Do you start with the image, or do you start with the words, or do you kind of just make it as you're going? it's really up to you. There's so much freedom here. And you could even, I mean, combine concrete poetry with some found poetry, try to force a shape into something that you saw in a book. It's so, I think it's so fascinating. And I have so much respect for whoever went through the trouble to make that panda, because
Oh my God, so much respect.
a
More
lot.
power.
That's a lot. That's hard work, and that's a lot of talent. So I would love to try concrete poetry.
Well, I think that's your assignment there for National Poetry Month, right?
There you go, Allie.
One concrete poem.
You've given
Okay.
yourself homework.
And then you got to share it with the class
Yeah.
next time.
Yeah. About that.
My connection was a little fuzzy there. I didn't catch the last part, but yep, I'll do that.
All right. All right. So we've got a little exercise here.
Yeah. So getting started. If you're a little apprehensive, don't know where to start, again, just start from any written word. You can see it. If it's on a cereal box, you can use it. If it's in a magazine, if it's in an article you see online, if it's a series of tweets, if you've got a book you're currently reading. Don't steal my idea, Kris. That's what I'm doing.
But oh my God, it's so awesome. Series of tweets. Oh, I even know whose tweets I want to use.
All right, we'll share it. If you make a concrete poem out of a series of tweets, we will consider it a group assignment.
Oh
and then, yeah, you can share it for me.
Oh my God.
Wait, you're gonna do a concrete poem out of tweets, or you're gonna do like a blackout?
I think I'm going to. I think I know how. Oh my God.
I'm interested to see what that actually ends up looking like.
Well, I'll lend you my idea if you do the assignment for me, and then you'll. It's a team effort. Anyway, so you can use any book. If you just want to pick up the one you're currently reading and use that one, that's totally fine. Just make it easy for yourself. You don't have to put a ton of thought. If you'd like to put a lot of thought into the source material that you're using, absolutely. But if you don't want to, if you just want to pick something up and give it a go, absolutely do it. I was assigned a found poem when I was in college, and I was kind of floundering a little bit. I didn't know what I wanted to use, but I was reading The Handmaid's Tale for another class. So I just picked up The Handmaid's Tale and I made my found poem. So if you're doing that, if you're in school and you're working on something, try using one of the books that you're already reading. And if you're not comfortable or aren't able to mark up your books, especially your library books, which we have to frown upon.
Although I have to I'm picturing like someone in circulation flipping through a book, checking to make sure that there are no banana peels or anything like that in there, and then there's like a found poem in there. Like I have to say, I don't even know that I would be mad. Like I might pay that fine, or whatever patron turned that in. Like that. If you're going to deface a library book, which you shouldn't, but if you were going to deface a library book, that would be the dopest way to do it.
For the record, none of us are saying that we would pay the fine. We're saying we would consider it strongly because that would be pretty cool. But don't.
We would
I think it depends on the quality of the poem, right?
Oh,
so if you're going to take this risk, like if you're watching this video and you're going to take the risk, then you need to make sure that you do it properly.
I will absolutely read the found poem. However, the fine will be yours. Anyway, so what we recommend, as opposed to defacing your library books, which you can take a picture. Take a picture of the page, rewrite it, type it out on a blank sheet of paper, and then make your found poem.
Or come to the library and have us make a photocopy of it.
Yes, we would be more than happy to make a photocopy of your page. Or you can, there are ways. And it's also okay if you're really nervous, you've never done something like Blackout Poetry or something like that. It's okay to plan it out. It's okay to look at the text you're using and kind of think about it before you go in with your Sharpie and mark out a bunch of words. I was working on a Blackout poem a couple months ago, I think for another Writing Wednesday when we were doing poetry. And so I just printed out the article I was going to use, and I just went through and highlighted what I thought I might like to use, so that I had a little blueprint so that when I went in with my Sharpie, I knew what was going on. Or if you're feeling adventurous, just go in and see what happens. It's really okay, and we really kind of challenge you to go in with an open mind and just allow inspiration to strike as you're working. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, as you said, to create something absolutely masterful, especially your first time through. Just go in and do what you're feeling in the moment.
Yeah, I definitely try not to have any sort of plan whatsoever. Let chaos reign, baby.
I don't, ugh, it worries me. Well, I'm very worried that I'm going to run into the situation that Tino said, and I'm going to accidentally mark out my the or my and all of a sudden it just doesn't make any sense. And that's my fear. So if you're like me,
That's when the real game begins, Allie. That's when the real game begins.
not brave enough for the real game yet, but
I think the nice thing about the, especially like the Blackout Poetry portion of it, or Whiteout Poetry, whichever version you end up doing, is that, you know, because you're basing it off the source material, if it's a crap poem that comes out of it, you can always blame it on the source material, right?
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
you know, it's not that I'm not a genius, it's that the source material was not very good, and this was the best poem that I could find in there. It's not my fault that the best poem is a crap poem. That's
Yeah.
just
Also,
source
Tina,
material.
remember, if you don't like this poem, turn the page, start again.
yep, unless
Which
it's a library book,
I would be
then stop where
remiss.
you are.
I would be remiss if I did not point out that in the teen areas at all of our locations, we do have pages available for you to try out Blackout Poetry of your own. I added Poetry 101. It pretty much breaks down every single form of poetry that exists and gives you a couple examples and tips on how to write the different forms. It also goes over famous poet examples of the different things, and it does have everything from iambic pentameter to blank verse. Um, Blue Lipstick is actually a collection of concrete poems, like we were looking at the end there. That's what the entire book is. It's phenomenal. Wade in the Water is the book where they have taken Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and have rewritten it as found poetry. Aphrodite Made Me Do It. That's going to be a collection that shows you how art and poetry are so beautifully integrated together, and hopefully inspire you to try that yourself. And then, of course, we have The Wasteland. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, so absolutely check out some of these resources, and as always, feel free to come into the library and ask any questions that you might have about what we talked about today or about any of these resources.
Order to Blackout Poetry.
Yeah. Send us your Blackout poetry, and also feel free to give us suggestions on things you would like to see us discuss on Writing Wednesdays. Happy National Poetry Month, and
Happy
until
National.
next time,
Until next time, happy writing.
happy writing. Happy writing.
Do
Goodbye.
not deface your library books.
Do not deface your library books.
For the record.
And bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.